Hi everyone, I'm Ray and I would like to share a few games I played recently in a tournament known as the 2022 December Invitational. So this is a double round robin with 4 players including me. So I'll get to play these opponents again as the opposite color later. So my first game was against Chen Dai and I was black. We played a pretty theoretical game which ended up as a draw after 34 moves of pretty much Fury. So I was black here, and we walked into a bot Vinnic, and yeah, it's all Fury, so I'll go quite quickly through it. But pretty much the gist of this opening is it's just a memory check where my opponent tries to be tricky and test if I remember like the Fury, and that is pretty much exactly what happened in this game. So this was all normal, and it's pretty common theory. After b4, white has 2 options here, knight a4 and rook b1. So I believe knight a4 is the more popular option, but my opponent goes rook b1 here. So the idea is after b takes c3, he gets to take back, and this hits my queen as well as my bishop. So after I move my queen, he gets to play stuff like this, opening up a discovered attack on my queen. And this is just winning for white because the attack is too strong. So I played queen a6, which sidesteps this attack and may actually threaten to take the knight. So d takes a6, I take his bishop, he attacks the rook and the bishop with the pawn, I take the rook, and now chess.com gives this a double question mark, but this is actually a very important move. Another move that white could play here is king takes f1, but after king takes f1, I could take the pawn, rook g8, attack the bishop, knight can defend the bishop, and this is also known to be a draw. So if I have a look here, yeah, it even gives queen d5 as the best move. Oh, okay, king f1's the best move now, but I'm not sure why the engine hates queen d5 that much when, yeah, it's still one of the best moves here. So bishop takes a7, f takes. So I need to take the bishop here. I need to take the pawn with my bishop here, because let's say I play bishop d3. He just gets to check me, knight block, and there's stuff like this which works. So bishop f4, if I play queen b7, then there's e takes d8 check with queen takes wins. There's also just taking here immediately and then taking the knight. So it's a ton of random stuff that involves e takes d8 that wins, because my king needs to take back, which would leave my knight undefended. So I have to take here. And now if he plays queen a8 check, get to play knight b8. And if stuff like this happens, so attacking my knight, I get to play queen b7. And this time, if he takes with check, I get to take with the rook, and my king still defends my queen and my knight. And this would be pretty much winning for me. So knight e4, and this threatens knight d6 check. So I could just take the rook there, because after knight d6, I could just move my king up, then move my king up again, since this was threatening discovered checks, and I don't want to be checked after knight takes c4, because it would mean that my king would need to walk backwards, and there's probably some mating attack there. So king b6, knight takes, king b5, knight d6, and usually people just take a draw here. And yeah, it's just a perpetual check. But a4 is a trickier move, stops my king from going up. So I need to take here with the b pawn. He now takes and queens, rook takes d8, knight c4 check, and if I move my king up, I lose to knight takes a3 followed by knight takes b1. The queen might throw in a few checks before the knight takes on b1, but that's the general idea, and I'll be losing there. So I need to sack my queen. But the idea here is to play a2. And because I won so much material earlier, it's actually just a knight and a rook for the queen. Um, So I'm not really that much down on material. And this pawn is also about to promote. So the best white could do here is a perpetual check. And that's pretty much what happened, and we agreed to a draw. So my second game, because my opponent saw my first game, he decided to play the same thing. So the opening's pretty much the same. This was against Jesse Zafirakos as black. And yeah, the opening's exactly the same, but my opponent chose to play knight a4 here instead of rook b1. After knight a4, queen's on the attack, queen b5, a3. So this is all still theory. Knight b8 lets me attack the pawn with my rook as well. So a takes, c takes, queen d4, knight c6. So against other moves such as queen g4 and queen e2, I could just take the pawn with my bishop, and those moves will all result in draws as well. But queen d4, I need to play knight c6 here to defend my pawn. Also attacks the queen, and white could take my knight. Rook takes d4, c takes b7 check, king b8. This is all pretty forced as well. Bishop a3 attacks my rook. And in this position, I can't really move my rook because it opens up an attack on a7. And this will get really dangerous for me. The knight also wants to jump to a6 one day. And if the knight can come here in one move, I'll just be losing because I would need to sack my queen. So yeah, I need to defend my rook with the pawn. b3, c3 to keep everything blocked. Rook fd1, bishop h6. And you'll see the point of this in the next few moves, because after bishop takes, e takes, rook takes. Now c2, and my bishop is defending the c1 square. Rook c4 sort of stops me from promoting. So I sack my queen here, b takes, and rook d8 is pretty important here as well. If I promote straight away, rook takes, bishop takes, knight c5, and then I can't stop both knight a6 and knight d7 at once, and with this being the bigger threat. So yeah, I had to really play rook d8 here. This threatens rook d1 check, so white is forced to use a move to stop the check, and then I get to promote anyway. And after knight c5, this time I get to play rook d6, which stops both knight d7 and knight a6. So, and finally, after he played king g2, I was out of theory. So I played bishop e2 here to try and attack the pawn. I also looked at bishop g5, but knight a4 is just a fork, and it looked winning for white. I didn't really consider this move that much, because I still kind of wanted to win here, despite knowing that it was a draw. So if he just pushes his pawns here, let's say g4, I get to play a4, knight takes, and then he probably needs to sack the knight for the pawn one day. And the point of sacking this pawn was so that I could push the b pawn, because the knight was defending b3 when it was on c5. So that looked quite drawn, so I didn't really want to go into that much. Bishop a2, knight b3, trying to reroute the knight. I also looked at knight e4 here. This was the move that worked against bishop g5, but against bishop b2, I could just play rook c6 and then take the pawn. So knight b3, bishop takes f6. Another move I considered was just playing rook d3, but this also looked kind of like fine. It's also drawn, but again, it looked a bit too drawish for me. So I just took the pawn here. Knight a5. Now, this isn't really that much of a threat, but it is because I might need to sack the rook. After knight c6, I could also take on b7, and he gets to take that pawn. So I had to choose my moves carefully here, because if this happens, right, if I play rook d3, now pretty much it looks pretty much losing for me. I have this pass pawn, but he just has more pawns than me. So I played king c7 to avoid like all of these knight c6 tactics. And then he plays h4 here. I also looked at the move c5, and I was going to play rook d2 here. After rook d2, knight c6, king takes. So this is what I was talking about earlier. Knight takes b4. And in this line, my rook isn't on, so it's fine for me. And engines prefer king c8 compared to the other king moves, possibly because there aren't any extra knight checks that could happen. Also considered this move, but yeah, it didn't look as good, and it's probably losing because although I have these two passed pawns, again he just has two extra pawns on the other side, so I didn't want to go into that. h4 happens, then I play rook b6. The idea is to just push this pawn, and if his knight sacks for it, then I'm just winning. Bishop d5, and I think his idea was after b3, he gets to play c5, but this is still okay for me. Rook b5, knight takes, bishop c3, takes a5, and engines think this is drawn, but it's not something like I would want to play out. White just has a lot more pawns than me, and they're pretty much all passed pawns, so it's really scary to play. So yeah, I didn't want to work into this at all. So I played bishop d4. The idea was to stop c5, but it's actually kind of a bit of a mistake because of the move knight b3. So I calculated and I thought that this was drawn because after g4, I could sack my rook for the pawn. Bishop takes, king takes. The king could come closer, but my king could help these pawns push. So maybe c5, king b5, king e4. He's also trying to help this guy promote a5, and this is still drawn here, like b2, and we promote at the same time. So I calculated this stuff out to be a draw. And if he plays knight d2 here, so not sacking the knight, I have bishop c3, and after c6, king b6, and he can't really go for this because I have bishop here and then check. So in the line that is better for white, I wouldn't have this resource here because I'll show you later as well. But after knight c4 check, this is also drawn. So the better move that I didn't calculate after bishop g7 was h5. And after h5, like the same thing could happen, but in this line, so let's say I start moving my king up. Let's say I start moving my king up this way. Here, here, here. And the same thing could happen, right? But this time, here, here, takes. I don't have bishop f4 anymore. And this is just winning for white. So that's how h5 works. So against h5, I probably would have had to try something else. And I think f5 is the best response here, but I'm not completely sure. After king f3, just rook h6. And it sort of holds everything together. But my opponent just blunders with g4. And I get to just play b3 here. c5, bishop takes. So remember how this was the point of moving the bishop to d4. Knight takes b3. And I played king d6 here. So now I have like an attack on the bishop as well as an attack on the knight with my rook. So bishop takes f7, rook takes b7, attacking the bishop. Then my opponent plays knight takes c5. Maybe moving the bishop away could still hold on to a draw, but not too sure. It's just worse for white now because I could help protect this pawn and try and promote it. But after knight takes c5, rook takes. This is just really hard for white to play. And I get to just push this pawn. So my opponent resigned after a4. And finally, my last opponent was Tejas Datar. And this time I was white. We went into a Sicilian, but I sort of forgot theory here. And I should have just castled. But instead I played bishop d3. And after bishop d3 was just like worse for me because the bishop is sort of misplaced. Rook e1, bishop e7, takes. So against knight takes, I was going to play queen g4. Turns out it was a bad move because black could just castle and black's doing fine. The queen's not really doing too much over here. So knight e2 is the stronger move. But after c takes, I played knight e2 here. I also considered knight d5. It's actually pretty cool because after bishop, if he takes here, this is just winning. I thought this was just winning for me. There's a massive attack. And yeah, it looked pretty nice, actually. But the main move I was scared of was bishop d6. And queen g4 is what I looked at, threatening that. So if takes now, I get to just take on g7. And I am winning here because there's not really much black could play. Like, I could just grab this pawn, maybe double my rooks, and put my bishop on f6. And yeah, black is just kind of stuck. So that looked pretty good for me. But I also looked at the moves g6 and h5, and they seemed pretty good for black. So I didn't go into this. Knight e2, a6. And again, just some standard stuff, kicking the bishop away. C takes d4, castles, and I decided to defend the wrong pawn here. So I should have defended the d pawn with bishop b2, but I was a bit worried about knight takes b4. Queen b3, defending bishop, and I didn't really like how he had the two bishops here. But yeah, it's probably fine for me, because I do have like these pawns that are quite nice. But instead I played rook b1, and I was pretty happy to give this away. The line I mainly looked at was just that, and this looked pretty okay for me. Because at this moment, I already kind of knew that I looked a little bit worse, because the bishop is putting a lot of pressure on f2. I can't really move this pawn at all. So rook b1, he plays d5, and I played knight g3. So I didn't really want to play a3 here, but this was probably one of the best moves. Because I was thinking that, I already defended the b pawn once. Didn't really want to use an extra move. But defending the b pawn with the rook also meant that I couldn't just play bishop b2, because it would block the defense and the knight would take. So in hindsight, it was probably better to play a3 instead of rook b1 if I wanted to defend this pawn. So yeah, I played knight g3 here, and could just take, knight takes. And this was a line I actually looked at, but I didn't really see how strong f5 was. Then like this bishop just gets shut down. And there are still annoying stuff on this diagonal. So bishop takes is what he played, and I just decided to trade stuff off. Because again, I thought I was a bit worse the whole time. I also looked at this line involving knight takes b4, but there's this pretty cool tactic. Bishop takes h7, king takes rook e4, and now I get to win the knight this way. I also calculated queen h5, but after king back rook e4 with the idea of threatening mate like this. Yeah, after this line, so with the idea of threatening mate like this, right? He could just take the pawn like this, and I don't really have a good move here because it's just offering a queen trade that I can't really even take because the knight just takes back. So yeah, I was probably going to play rook e4, and after queen takes, I was going to play rook takes, and I still have like this attacking idea. So it looked pretty good for me. So he just takes with the e pawn back, and this bishop was pretty bad. At least I thought it was pretty bad for me, so I wanted to trade it off. Better is probably this move instead, queen f3, and the idea is to play rook b3. So I'm down like some material here, but he can't really take the bishop. I get to take here, and I get to hold on for a draw. Bishop f5 is also alright, and after g6, it's just a trade of pieces. Knight a2, I kicked the queen around a bit, and I was sort of hoping he takes here, and if he takes there, it just looked really nice for me. I think my idea was to play this, and then it's pretty much a queen trap. So, but he saw it obviously, so he went to g4. At this point, he was running a bit low on time, so I was just trying to get into a pretty complicated endgame and try to win from there. So yeah, and he sort of just blunders a pawn later on. Rook fd8 is probably the better move. He gets to hold on to his a pawn. But he plays rook c2. I defend this pawn, and it's getting really hard to hold on to the a pawn as well. Again, probably a move that defends the a pawn is just better, like queen b6 here. But he just gives it away. Maybe because he was low on time. And now I reach an endgame where it's a queen and a pawn for just a queen. So, but this was still pretty hard to win, and I made a few mistakes along the way. Swapping queens is probably the easiest win. If the queens gets traded off, I get to just run my king up and target these pawns. But I played g3, and yeah, I just tried to push my pawn forward. If I swap queens here, it was just drawn. So I didn't really have a good idea here. And eventually I played h4. G4 would probably hold, but he'll need to worry about stuff like queen d4, queen d2, followed by queen g5 check. So he just takes into a losing position. A better way for me to have played this is to just go maneuver my queen over to d2 first, and then play h4, because this also stops g4, as I get to play queen g5 with check now. So yeah, it was a bit of a mistake on my part. But eventually I get to push my pawn, I got to swap off the queens, and I was able to take away this pawn. And this endgame is just winning for me now, pretty easily. So at the end of these 3 rounds, I'm on 2.5 out of 3. And there are 3 rounds left. Well, actually 2 rounds, because I beat Cheng Dai as white just earlier. But yeah, thanks for watching this video.